Maria!
No, le ho detto che deve restare ferma. Non agiti quei bicipiti. Ferma, ferma! Lei è la figura di una pala d'altare, ha capito? Ferma!
Maria! Maria!
Stop!
Che peccato! Che peccato! Che peccato! Che peccato! Che peccato!
Questo è il figlio mio, il diletto nel quale ho posto le mie compiacenze.
These are the words of the controversial Italian poet, writer, and filmmaker Paolo Pasolini, a publicly avowed Marxist and atheist. By employing an intermediate approach, Pasolini encourages and radicalizes a fight against the impoverishment of local Italian cultures and traditions in Italy's transition to an industrialized neo-capitalist country mid-20th century. In his body of work, Pasolini held the state and the bourgeoisie accountable for depleting Italy of its spirituality. He is also deliberate in his emphasis on the Church's failure in disseminating Christ's original teachings, which is to protect the poor and the forgotten ones. Pasolini found Italy's period of modernization after the Second World War demeaning and neglectful to the subproletariat, a message he introduces and allegorizes across his art with the motif of the Christological figure. We can see this in his earlier works, such as in his second feature film, Mama Roma, where Pasolini alludes to Christ through Ettore, as well as in his later films, like in Teorema, where it is done through the mysterious allegory of the anonymous visitor. In La Ricotta, this time explicitly, Pasolini juxtaposes the working-class Stracci, a supposedly greedy thief, with a superficial representation of Jesus, paying homage to early Italian Renaissance and Mannerist frescoes, by which he exposes the hypocrisies of the dominant constituted powers of the 60s Italy. Due to its explicit criticism, La Ricotta was accused of being an attack upon religion, and therefore faced state censorship. This experience posed a mandatory challenge for Pasolini. He was compelled to develop a new artistic strategy, as well as a narrative subjectivity distant from his own, in order to maintain his political agenda. The Gospel according to St. Matthew, which has a script that exclusively utilizes the Book of Matthew, emerges as a direct response to this mandatory challenge. The film was awarded numerous prizes by the Church, which meant that Pasolini had successfully managed to attack the state and the Church from within and by their own ideological truth. In the Gospel according to St. Matthew, Pasolini radicalizes a Marxist reading of Catholicism through a delicate and deliberate control over its balance of the sacred and the realist. The former is embodied in his choice for a loyal adaptation of the biblical text and iconography, while the latter is embodied in his choice for a neo-realist style to represent the subproletarian condition in post-war Italy. This implores further questioning. How can a film, seemingly so respectful to the canon's sacredness, be a criticism of the canon itself? Pasolini directly addresses this question. He says, "You do not realize that I walked on the razor's edge, avoiding, on my part, a purely historicist and human vision, and on the believer's part, a vision that is too mythical. I made an enormous effort of indirect sincerity through the believer and at the same time not to betray myself. The effort to maintain a balance between these two points of view gave the film a tension which indirectly recovers its sacredness." The fact that the Gospel's script is taken entirely from the Book of Matthew already indicates Pasolini's suspension of control. However, Pasolini's deliberate exercises in paying homage to early pre-Renaissance paintings, particularly that of Giotto's, demonstrates his retention of authorial control. Giotto, a painter commissioned by St. Peter's Church in the early 14th century, was renowned not only for the realism of his works, particularly in the perspectival and narrative shift, but also for the stark frontality in his paintings. While the frontality to Giotto's paintings often glorify Christ's sanctity, Pasolini deploys the very same perspectival element to confront and interrogate Christ and his church commission representation. Pasolini described Christ as mild at heart but never in his reason. The figure of Christ should have eventually discerned violence as a resistance. This was the reason behind his deliberate choice of Matthew's Gospel. Christ in Matthew's book is not accommodating, and rather than a remotely divine figure, he is a character who is able to renew the passion, the violence, and the rage of the revolutionary Christian message. In Pasolini's film, Jesus is not gentle, he rarely smiles. He is disdainful, sad, and solitary, even when accompanied by the apostles. In fact, he has a twofold function. On one hand, he represents the religious divinity worshipped by many Italians. On the other, with his rediscovered rage, he denounces their superficiality and hypocrisies. Pasolini deepens this presentation of Jesus by employing a non-actor Marxist economics student to play the role of Christ, and his intention is to bring the real-life context of his chosen non-actors to the screen. However, with the loyal adaptation of the Book of Matthew, Pasolini is confined to a specific time frame, the biblical epoch during Jesus' crucifixion, which of course excludes the precise socio-political hegemonies Pasolini aims to criticize, such as the oppressive Italian government of the 60s and the Church. Nevertheless, it is through an implied analogy by absence where Pasolini creates a space to mirror the Bible's oppressors, like the Roman Empire and the Pharisees, with those of the 60s Italy. Not only does this authorize a harsher criticism, but it retains an opacity, leaving the interpretation pliable to both the rich and the poor, the church and the proletariat, and thus ineligible for censorship. Although Pasolini regarded Palestine as the Holy Land of the Gospel, he was not restricted in his choice of location as opposed to the time frame. Having control over the film's space, he chose to set it in the southern Italian city of Matera, a city that was considered to be the shame of Italy due to its miserable health conditions at the time. Such a choice for location provocatively denunciates disproportionate industrialization, often overlooked in the Italian model of development, and amplifies Pasolini's criticism of the state's lack of responsibility in regulating social inequalities. Now, reflecting on our own approach, another important reading of the Gospel according to St. Matthew could be a metatextual one. Does an author-oriented approach towards Pasolini's body of work, with a focus dedicated solely to the author's exercises of control, run the risk of, first, stripping away spectatorial autonomy? And second, by focusing entirely on control, are we as spectators giving Pasolini a power that elevates his figure to one of mythological status? The latter point poses a limitation that is paradoxical. The Gospel attempts to strip Jesus down from his mythical status, and yet, in Pasolini's process of doing so, he himself runs the risk of embodying a mythical figure. Given the emphasis placed on the agency and freedom of the viewer through Pasolini's thematic choices, how would he react to being placed on the pedestal of ultimate control? The contradictions inherent in an author-oriented approach embody a liminal space, where the secular becomes myth and the freedom becomes control.
Allora, non dite niente a nessuno.